The water pressed against her chest like a living thing trying to crush her lungs. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Chief Petty Officer Ramona Delacroix held perfectly still at the bottom of the combat diving tank, her eyes fixed on the digital clock mounted to the observation window above. Through the distortion of 12 feet of water, she could see Senior Chief Rennick watching her with those ice-blue eyes that never seemed to blink. His voice crackled through the underwater communication system, calm and patient as a man waiting for an animal to die in a trap. Whenever you are ready to quit, Delacroix, nobody would blame you. Before we dive deeper into this story, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. Maybe you have seen someone push to their breaking point and refuse to break. 3 minutes and 51 seconds. Her diaphragm began to spasm, her body screaming for oxygen that her mind refused to seek. She had been holding her breath since she was 6 years old, diving for crawfish in the murky bayous outside Houma with her grandfather. He had taught her that panic was a choice, that the body could endure far more than the mind believed possible, that the ones who survived were the ones who understood the difference between discomfort and danger. For minutes, the spasms intensified. Black flowers bloomed at the edges of her vision. Above her, she saw Rennick lean forward slightly, anticipation flickering across his weathered face. He wanted her to surface. He needed her to surface. Every day she remained on this team was a day that proved his objections wrong, and Senior Chief Cade Rennick was not a man who enjoyed being wrong. For minutes and 12 seconds, Delacroix kicked off the bottom and rose through the water with controlled grace, breaking the surface without a gasp, without a desperate gulp for air. She exhaled slowly, drew breath through her nose, and looked directly at Rennick. Her expression revealed nothing. "Adequate," Rennick said, checking something on his tablet. "Barely." She pulled herself onto the pool deck, water streaming from her dark hair. Petty Officer Ewan handed her a towel without a word, but his eyes said what his mouth could not with Rennick watching. That was the longest hold of anyone on the team this quarter, by 30 seconds. The training facility hummed with activity around them. Other operators moved through their rotations, the clang of weights mixing with the sharp commands of instructors pushing men to their limits. This was Naval Special Warfare Group territory, the tip of the spear, and every person here had earned their place through suffering. Every person except her, according to some. "Delacroix," Rennick called out as she headed toward the locker room. "Debrief in 20. The briefing room." She acknowledged with a nod and kept walking. Ewan fell into step beside her, the sniper moving with that particular silence that made him so effective behind a rifle. He was one of the few who treated her as simply another operator rather than an experiment to be observed or a problem to be solved. "He's going to find a reason to pull you from the rotation," Ewan said quietly. "That intelligence brief coming in today, the Southeast Asia thing. He has been positioning for a week." Delacroix kept her voice even. "Then I will give him no reason." The locker room was empty when she entered, a small mercy. She leaned against the cold metal of her locker and allowed herself 3 seconds of closed eyes, 3 seconds to feel the weight of constant evaluation pressing down on her shoulders. Then she opened her eyes and began preparing for whatever Rennick had planned. 20 minutes later, she sat in the briefing room alongside 11 other operators. Rennick stood at the front, Commander Stokes seated to his right. The lieutenant commander was a political creature, everyone knew that, but she was also fair. Delacroix had learned to take what allies she could find, even imperfect ones. The screen behind Rennick displayed satellite imagery of a port facility, the kind of anonymous industrial waterfront that could exist in a dozen countries across the Pacific. Rennick began his briefing with the clipped efficiency of a career operator. Port Common, unofficial transshipment point for weapons moving to designated terrorist organizations. We have confirmation that a high-value facilitator will be on site in 14 days. Delacroix studied the imagery, her mind already calculating approach vectors, tide patterns, potential overwatch positions. This was what she had trained for. This was why she had endured every obstacle Rennick had placed in her path. A commotion near the door interrupted Rennick mid-sentence. Petty Officer Webb stumbled in, his face flushed with what Delacroix immediately recognized as the aftereffects of the previous night. He was young, talented, and possessed of the particular arrogance that came from never having truly failed. He dropped into a seat, knocking over a water bottle in the process. Rennick's expression hardened. "Webb, explain." The young operator fumbled. "There was a situation with my vehicle. Mechanical issue." Delacroix watched Rennick's jaw tighten. She knew what was coming. Webb had been late 3 times this month, and 3 strikes meant removal from mission consideration. Rennick needed every operator he could get for this mission, but he also needed discipline. Before Rennick could deliver the verdict, Delacroix spoke. "He was with me, Senior Chief. I asked him to help me run some calculations on the tidal charts for this area. Lost track of time." The room went silent. Webb stared at her with naked confusion. Rennick's eyes narrowed, searching for the lie, finding nothing in her calm expression. "Is that so?" Rennick said flatly. "Yes, Senior Chief. My mistake. It will not happen again." Something flickered in Rennick's expression, there and gone. He knew. She knew he knew, but she had given him no proof, and challenging her directly would reveal that he had been looking for an excuse to punish Webb rather than help him improve. "See that it does not," Rennick said finally, turning back to the briefing. Delacroix did not look at Webb, did not acknowledge what she had done. She simply returned her attention to the satellite imagery and waited. When the briefing concluded and operators began filing out, Rennick's voice cut through the movement. "Delacroix." A moment. She remained seated as the room emptied. Ewan caught her eye from the doorway, concern evident despite his efforts to mask it. She gave him the smallest shake of her head, and he departed. Rennick waited until they were alone. When he spoke, his voice was low and measured. "I have submitted my recommendation to Commander Stokes regarding mission personnel." Delacroix kept her breathing steady. "And what is your recommendation, Senior Chief?" "That you be removed from the mission roster effective immediately." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a detonation. Removed from the mission roster. Delacroix felt the familiar cold settle into her chest, the same cold she had learned to master beneath 12 feet of water. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. "On what grounds, Senior Chief?" Rennick folded his arms across his chest. "Operational readiness concerns. Team cohesion. The usual factors that determine mission success or failure. My performance metrics exceed team average in 7 of 9 categories." "Metrics do not tell the whole story, Delacroix. You know that as well as I do." She rose from her chair slowly, maintaining the measured control that had become her armor. "Then tell me the whole story, Senior Chief. Tell me what I have done that warrants removal from an operation I am qualified to execute." Rennick's expression remained impassive, but something shifted behind those ice-blue eyes. "This is not personal." "No, of course not." Delacroix moved toward the door, then stopped. She turned back to face him. "Permission to speak freely, Senior Chief." A slight hesitation. "Granted. You have been looking for a reason to remove me since the day I arrived. Every assignment designed to break me. Every evaluation weighted against me. Every opportunity for failure magnified, while every success is dismissed as adequate or barely." She kept her voice level, almost conversational. "I'm not going anywhere. And when Commander Stokes reviews your recommendation, she will see exactly what I see. A senior chief who cannot separate his personal objections from his professional obligations." She did not wait for his response. The door closed behind her with a soft click that felt louder than any slam could have been. Commander Stokes maintained an office on the 2nd floor of the operations building, a small space cluttered with commendations, family photographs, and the accumulated paperwork of a career spent navigating the treacherous waters between combat operations and military politics. Delacroix stood at attention before the lieutenant commander's desk, waiting. Stokes finished reading something on her tablet, then looked up. "At ease, Chief." "Seat." Delacroix sat. "I have received Senior Chief Rennick's recommendation." Stokes set the tablet aside and studied Delacroix with an expression that revealed nothing. "He makes a compelling case. With respect, Commander, his case is built on bias rather than evidence." "Perhaps." Stokes leaned back in her chair. But bias is difficult to prove, and Rennick has 18 years of exemplary service backing his judgment. What do you have? Delacroix met her commanding officer's gaze. 14 months of performance data, training records that speak for themselves, and a knowledge that if you remove me from this mission without cause, you'll be proving that the integration program was never given a fair chance. The silence stretched between them. Stokes was calculating, Delacroix knew, weighing the political implications, the operational considerations, the personal risks of backing either horse in this race. Finally, the commander spoke. I'm not removing you from the roster, but understand this clearly, Chief. You are on thin ice. One mistake, one moment of hesitation, one instance where your presence creates friction that compromises the mission, and Rennick will have all the ammunition he needs. And I will not be able to protect you. Understood, Commander. Stokes picked up her tablet again, a clear dismissal. Prove him wrong, Delacroix. That is the only path forward. The underwater navigation course sprawled across the eastern section of the training facility, a maze of obstacles designed to simulate the kind of confined space operations that separated special warfare from conventional diving. Delacroix floated at the starting position, checking her equipment one final time while the rest of the team prepared around her. Ewan appeared at her shoulder, his rebreather already in place. Heard Stokes kept you on the roster. Word travels fast. Small community. He adjusted his mask. Rennick is not happy. Switch the training pairs for today. Delacroix felt a flicker of unease. She had been counting on Ewan's steady presence during the navigation exercise. Who am I paired with? Before he could answer, Webb materialized beside them, his expression a mixture of resentment and obligation. Apparently, I am your battle buddy today, Chief. Lucky me. The exercise was straightforward in concept. Navigate the underwater maze. Locate 3 objective markers. Return to starting position. Time was recorded, but completion was the primary metric. Simple enough under normal circumstances. But Delacroix understood immediately what Rennick had done. Webb was still struggling with his underwater navigation skills. Pairing him with her meant that any failure would be shared, any delay attributed to both of them. Webb, she said quietly, stay on my left. Match my pace. If you get disoriented, tap my arm twice. I know how to dive, Chief. Then prove it. The water closed over them like a cold embrace. Delacroix led the way into the maze, her movements efficient and economical. Webb followed, his technique competent, but lacking the fluid grace that came with true mastery. She monitored him through her peripheral vision, tracking his breathing rate, watching for signs of trouble. They located the first marker without incident. The second required navigating a particularly narrow passage, the kind of confined space that triggered panic in divers who had not fully conquered their claustrophobia. Webb hesitated at the entrance, his bubbles coming faster. Delacroix touched his arm, caught his eye, and gestured for him to follow. She entered the passage first, moving with deliberate calm, showing him that the space was navigable, that the walls would not close in, that the way forward was clear. He followed, his movements jerky but controlled. They were halfway to the third marker when it happened. Webb's rebreather malfunctioned. Not catastrophically, not the kind of failure that meant immediate death, but enough to spike his carbon dioxide levels, enough to trigger the cascade of panic that could kill a diver faster than any equipment failure. He thrashed, reaching for the surface that was 30 feet and a maze of obstacles away. Delacroix grabbed him, held him, forced him to meet her eyes through their masks. She tapped her own rebreather, then pointed to him, then made the hand signal for buddy breathing. He stared at her for a long moment, terror and pride warring in his expression. Then he nodded. She shared her air with him, alternating breaths as she guided him through the maze toward the nearest exit point. It was slower than surfacing directly, more complicated, but it was safe. It was controlled. It was the kind of decision that prioritized his life over her time. They broke the surface 3 minutes past the target time. Rennick stood on the deck, stopwatch in hand, his expression unreadable. Failed, he announced. 3 minutes over threshold. Delacroix pulled off her mask. Webb's rebreather malfunctioned at the 60-meter mark. I initiated buddy breathing protocols and navigated to the nearest safe exit. Rennick made a note on his tablet. The time stands. Equipment failure is part of the exercise parameters. You should have planned for contingencies. She felt Webb's eyes on her, felt the weight of what she had sacrificed to save him. 3 minutes. 3 minutes that Rennick would use as evidence of her inadequacy. 3 minutes that might cost her everything. But Webb was alive. Webb was breathing. And sometimes that had to be enough. The team dispersed to the locker rooms, but Delacroix lingered by the pool, staring into the water that had become both her sanctuary and her battlefield. The memory surfaced unbidden, the one she tried to keep submerged. Mindanao, 18 months ago, the 2 seconds that had cost a man his life. She had hesitated at a doorway, just 2 seconds of uncertainty, and in those 2 seconds everything had changed. She would not hesitate again, no matter what it cost her. Webb appeared beside her, his gear bag over his shoulder. He stood there for a long moment, saying nothing. Then, quietly, "You did not have to do that. Share your air. You could have let me surface on my own." You would have panicked, gotten tangled in the maze, maybe drowned. He nodded slowly. "I have been wrong about you, Chief." He walked away before she could respond. It was not forgiveness. It was not acceptance. But it was a crack in the wall, and Delacroix had learned long ago that cracks were where the light got in. The assignment came down the following morning, delivered with the cold efficiency of a firing squad. Delacroix would be attached to the boat crew for the Port Common operation. Support element. 500 meters offshore, while the real operators executed the mission she had trained her entire career to perform. Rennick delivered the news in the team briefing room, his tone carefully neutral, professionally above reproach. Given the time constraints and the need for optimal team cohesion in the primary assault element, I have made adjustments to the personnel assignments. He did not look at her when he read her name among the boat crew roster. He did not need to. The other operators shifted in their seats, some avoiding her gaze, others watching with the detached curiosity of spectators at an execution. Ewan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Webb stared at the table in front of him, his expression unreadable. Delacroix listened to the rest of the assignments without reaction. She had learned long ago that showing pain only encouraged those who wished to inflict it. When Rennick dismissed the team, she rose and walked out with the same measured stride she had maintained since arriving at this command. Steady, controlled, unbroken. She found a quiet corner of the equipment bay and began inventorying her gear with methodical precision. Mask, fins, rebreather components. Each item checked and rechecked, a meditation in preparedness that allowed her mind to process what her heart refused to accept. Footsteps approached. She did not look up. "That was garbage," Ewan said quietly, positioning himself to block the view of anyone who might be watching. Complete garbage, and everyone knows it. Everyone knowing does not change anything. He leaned against the equipment rack, arms folded. "I could talk to Stokes. Tell her what Rennick has been doing. The impossible standards, the rigged evaluations. And what would that accomplish?" Delacroix finally met his eyes. "It would make you a target, too. Rennick would find a way to push you out, and then I would have lost the only ally I have in this unit. So we just accept it." "No." She returned to her inventory, her hands moving with automatic precision. "We adapt. We find another way. We wait for the moment when the mission matters more than his vendetta." Ewan was silent for a long moment. Then he straightened and walked away without another word. She understood. There was nothing more to say. The mission planning sessions continued over the following days, and Delacroix attended each one despite her diminished role. She sat in the back of the briefing room, taking notes, studying the satellite imagery, memorizing every detail of Port Common's layout. If she could not participate in the assault, she would at least understand it completely. It was during the third planning session that she noticed the anomaly. Commander Stokes was reviewing the tidal charts for the insertion timeline, walking the team through the narrow window when currents would be favorable for the swimmer approach. Delacroix studied the charts on her tablet, cross-referencing them with historical data she had pulled from the Naval Oceanographic Office database. Something was wrong. She ran the calculations again, checking her work twice before she was certain. The tidal predictions being used for mission planning were based on standard models, but Port Common sat at the confluence of two current systems that created localized variations. The models did not account for these variations. The actual tidal window would be 43 minutes earlier than planned, and the current strength would be nearly double what the team was expecting. Delacroix waited until the session concluded, then approached Commander Stokes with her tablet. "Commander, I believe there is an error in the tidal analysis." Stokes raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Delacroix walked her through the calculations, showing the discrepancy between standard models and the localized conditions. She pulled up historical current data from shipping records, demonstrated the pattern of variation, and projected the actual conditions the team would face during insertion. Stokes studied the data in silence. When she looked up, her expression had shifted from skepticism to something approaching respect. "How did you catch this?" "I grew up on the water, Commander. My grandfather was a shrimper in Louisiana. He taught me that the ocean does not care about models and predictions. It only cares about what is actually happening." Stokes turned to Rennick, who had been observing the exchange from across the room. "Senior Chief, review Chief Delacroix's analysis and adjust the insertion timeline accordingly." Rennick's expression flickered, a momentary crack in his professional mask. He crossed the room and took the tablet from Delacroix's hands, scrolling through her calculations with barely concealed irritation. After a long moment, he looked up. "The analysis appears sound. I will revise the timeline." He handed the tablet back without meeting her eyes and walked away. It was not an acknowledgement. It was not an apology, but it was something. That evening, Delacroix sat alone in the team common area, reviewing the updated mission parameters on her laptop. The facility was quiet, most operators either resting or engaged in personal time before the deployment. She welcomed the solitude, the chance to think without the constant weight of observation. The door opened and Webb entered, hesitating when he saw her. For a moment, she thought he would turn and leave. Instead, he crossed the room and dropped into a chair across from her. "Heard you caught the tidal error," he said. Rennick looked like he swallowed a grenade. "I was just doing my job." Webb nodded slowly, his fingers drumming against the armrest. "Look, about what happened in the pool, and before that, the way I treated you when you first got here." Delacroix closed her laptop and gave him her full attention. "I was wrong," Webb continued. "I listened to what everyone was saying about how you did not belong here, how you were going to get someone killed. I did not bother to actually watch you operate, to see what you could do. And now I have seen it." He met her eyes directly. "You saved my life in that training tank. Shared your air when you could have let me figure it out on my own. Cost yourself the completion time to make sure I got out safe. That is what teammates do." "Yeah." Webb's expression was complicated, something between shame and determination. "That is exactly the point." He stood and moved toward the door, then stopped. "For what it is worth, I think Rennick is wrong. About all of it. And I'm not the only one starting to think that way." The door closed behind him, leaving Delacroix alone with the hum of the ventilation system and the glow of her laptop screen. She allowed herself a small moment of something that felt almost like hope. The next morning brought the final mission briefing before deployment. Delacroix took her usual seat in the back, prepared to observe and absorb as she had for every previous session. But when Commander Stokes entered the room, she walked directly to where Delacroix was sitting. "Chief Delacroix, you're being reassigned." The words sent a jolt through her chest. Reassigned. Off the mission entirely. Rennick had finally won. Stokes continued without pause. "Based on your tidal analysis and your demonstrated expertise in maritime navigation, I am moving you from the boat crew to the reconnaissance element. You will partner with Petty Officer Ewan for Overwatch insertion." She paused, her eyes holding Delacroix's gaze. "Do not make me regret this decision." From across the room, Delacroix saw Rennick's expression harden into something cold and dangerous. His objection died on his lips as Stokes turned to address the full team, but his eyes found Delacroix's and held them with unmistakable meaning. This was not over. Not even close. But for the first time since arriving at this command, Delacroix felt the balance shift beneath her feet. She was back in the fight, and she intended to stay there. The C-17 touched down at Clark Air Base in the Philippines with a shudder that rattled through the cargo hold. Delacroix felt the vibration in her bones as the aircraft taxied toward the isolated hangar that would serve as their forward staging area. 12 hours of flight time had given her plenty of opportunity to review the mission parameters, memorize the port layout, and avoid the pointed silence radiating from Senior Chief Rennick 2 rows ahead. The team filed off the aircraft into the thick humidity of the Philippine evening. Heat wrapped around them like a wet blanket, a stark contrast to the climate-controlled comfort of Coronado. Delacroix adjusted quickly, her body remembering the sweltering summers of Louisiana, the way air could become something you wore rather than breathed. Ewan fell in a step beside her as they crossed the tarmac. "You ready for this?" "I've been ready for 18 months. The staging facility was austere but functional. Concrete walls, fluorescent lighting, rows of cots arranged with military precision. A separate area had been designated for mission planning, maps and satellite imagery already pinned to portable boards. The team would have 72 hours to finalize preparations before insertion. Rennick wasted no time establishing his authority. He assigned watch rotations, equipment checks, and rehearsal schedules with the efficiency of a man who had done this dozens of times before. Delacroix noted that her assignments were consistently the most demanding, the least desirable, the schedules that would leave her exhausted while others rested. She accepted each one without comment. On the second evening, Ewan found her in the corner of the equipment bay, running maintenance on her rebreather for the third time that day. The sniper settled onto a crate beside her, his rifle case balanced across his knees. "We need to talk about the insertion," he said quietly. Delacroix did not look up from her work. "What about it?" "The approach to the overwatch position. I have been studying the pier structure. There are more places for guards to post than the satellite imagery suggested. We need contingencies." She nodded, her hands continuing their practiced movements. "I have been thinking the same thing. If the guard positions have shifted, our original timeline becomes problematic." They spent the next hour reviewing approach options, developing hand signals for various scenarios, planning for contingencies that command had not anticipated. It was the kind of detailed coordination that separated operators who survived from those who did not. By the time they finished, Delacroix felt the familiar comfort of partnership, the knowledge that someone would be watching her back when everything went wrong. Ewan was quiet for a long moment after they concluded. Then he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "There is something you should know. About Rennick." Delacroix's hands stilled on her equipment. She waited. "Before we deployed, he approached me. Made an offer." Ewan's jaw tightened. He said there was a premium assignment coming up after this operation. Instructor billet at the schoolhouse. The kind of posting that sets up your whole career. And what did he want in return? Documentation. Anything you did wrong during the mission. Any mistake, any hesitation, any decision that could be questioned. He wanted a file he could use to end your career permanently. The words settled into Delacroix's chest like stones dropped into deep water. She had known Rennick opposed her presence, had felt his hostility in every interaction, every evaluation, every assignment designed to break her. But this was different. This was calculated destruction. "What did you tell him?" Ewan met her eyes directly. "I told him to go to hell." He paused. "It cost me the instructor billet and a promotion recommendation." Delacroix absorbed this information in silence. Ewan had sacrificed his career advancement to protect her, had made an enemy of the most powerful senior chief in the unit, had chosen integrity over opportunity in a world where such choices carried permanent consequences. "Why?" she finally asked. "Because I have seen you operate. I have watched you outperform half the team while carrying twice the weight." He shook his head slowly. "And because my father came to this country with nothing and built a life through work and merit. I will not be part of a system that punishes people for being good at their jobs." Delacroix did not know what to say. In 18 months of fighting for her place on this team, This was the first time someone had risked something real on her behalf. She reached out and gripped his forearm briefly, the warrior's gesture of solidarity that transcended words. "Thank you." Yuan nodded once. "Now, let's make sure we both come home from this." The final mission brief took place on the third evening, 12 hours before insertion. Commander Stokes led the walkthrough, reviewing every element of the operation with meticulous precision. The assault element would approach from the northern shore, breaching the facility while Delacroix and Yuan provided overwatch from their concealed position beneath the southern pier. The target, a logistics facilitator named Kareem Vasquez, would be in the port's administrative building conducting a weapons transfer negotiation. The window for action was narrow, 60 minutes from insertion to extraction, with no margin for error. Rennick added his own comments at the conclusion of the brief. His eyes found Delacroix as he spoke. "I want to be clear about rules of engagement. The reconnaissance element observes and reports. You do not engage unless directly threatened. You do not deviate from the mission parameters. You do not make independent tactical decisions." He let the words hang in the air. "Is that understood?" "Understood, Senior Chief," Delacroix replied evenly. The team dispersed to make final preparations. Delacroix returned to her cot and lay down, knowing she should sleep, but finding rest elusive. The mission played through her mind in an endless loop, each variable calculated and recalculated. But beneath the tactical analysis, another memory kept surfacing. Mindanao, 18 months ago. A different mission, a different target, a moment that had changed everything. They had been clearing a compound in the jungle, moving through doorways with the precision of hundreds of hours of training. She had been second in the stack, following Senior Chief Patterson through a structure they believed was empty. The door had opened and she had seen the gun, had registered the threat, had known exactly what she needed to do. And she had hesitated. 2 seconds, just 2 seconds of uncertainty, 2 seconds of her finger refusing to move, 2 seconds of her body betraying everything she had trained it to do. Patterson had taken the round meant for her. Center mass. He had died before the medevac arrived, his blood soaking into the dirt floor of that anonymous jungle building. 2 seconds. That was all it had taken to end a man's life and shatter her belief in her own capabilities. Delacroix closed her eyes and forced the memory back into its cage. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow she would prove that those 2 seconds did not define her. Tomorrow she would show Rennick, show Stokes, show everyone who had ever doubted her, that she belonged here. But as sleep finally claimed her, Patterson's face lingered behind her eyelids. A reminder of what hesitation cost. A warning of what she could not afford to repeat. The door to the barracks creaked open. Footsteps approached her cot and stopped. She kept her breathing steady, feigning sleep. Rennick's voice was barely audible. "If anything goes wrong tomorrow, I will make sure everyone knows exactly who is responsible." The footsteps retreated. The door closed. Delacroix lay in the darkness, her heart pounding against her ribs, and waited for morning. The small craft sliced through black water without running lights, its engine barely a whisper against the ambient noise of the distant port. Delacroix crouched in the bow, her wetsuit already sealed, her rebreather checked and rechecked until the motions had become prayer. Beside her, Yuan made his own final preparations, his sniper rifle wrapped in waterproof casing that would protect it during the 800-meter swim to the target. The night pressed down around them, moonless and thick with humidity. Perfect conditions for insertion. The kind of darkness that swallowed operators whole and spit them out on hostile shores unseen and unheard. Commander Stokes' voice crackled through the tactical radio. "Recon element, you are cleared for insertion. Maintain radio silence until you reach overwatch position. Assault element will hold at rally point Alpha until your confirmation." Delacroix keyed her mic twice in acknowledgement. No words necessary. No words wanted. The boat slowed, and she slipped over the side without a splash, the water enveloping her like a second skin. Yuan followed a heartbeat later, his form materializing beside her in the darkness. They oriented themselves toward the distant glow of Port Common and began the long swim that would carry them into the heart of enemy territory. The first 600 meters passed without incident. Delacroix set the pace, her strokes economical and precise, conserving energy for whatever waited ahead. The weight of her equipment was familiar, almost comforting, a reminder of countless training swims that had prepared her for exactly this moment. Ewan kept pace at her left shoulder, his presence a steady anchor in the featureless dark. They communicated through touch and gesture, a language developed over months of partnership that required no words and left no trace. At the 700-meter mark, Delacroix felt the current shift. Her tidal calculations had been accurate. The localized variation she had identified was exactly where she had predicted, a river of accelerated flow cutting across their approach vector. She adjusted her heading, angling into the current rather than fighting it directly, using its energy to propel them toward the pier rather than sweep them past it. Ewan matched her correction without hesitation. Trust earned through preparation. The pier materialized from the darkness like the skeleton of some massive sea creature, concrete pylons rising from the water to support the structure above. Delacroix slowed her approach, scanning for any sign of detection, any indication that their presence had been noticed. Nothing. The port hummed with distant activity, cranes moving containers, vehicles crawling along access roads, but the water beneath the pier remained undisturbed. They reached the first pylon and paused, treading water in the shadow of the concrete column. Delacroix checked her watch. They were 4 minutes ahead of schedule, her tidal corrections having shaved time from the original estimate. She signaled Ewan to hold position while she conducted a visual reconnaissance of the underside of the pier. The structure was older than the satellite imagery had suggested, wooden crossbeams connecting the concrete pylons in a lattice that created both obstacles and opportunities. She identified 3 potential overwatch positions where Ewan could establish a stable shooting platform with clear sight lines to the administrative building. She was about to signal the all-clear when light exploded across the water. A patrol boat rounded the far end of the pier, its spotlight sweeping the surface in lazy arcs. Delacroix grabbed Ewan's arm and pulled him down, both of them submerging in a controlled descent that left no bubbles, no ripples, no evidence of their presence. 15 feet below the surface, they waited. The light passed overhead, diffused by the water into a ghostly glow that swept back and forth like the eye of some searching predator. Delacroix counted seconds in her head, tracking the patrol's movement by the changing intensity of the illumination above them. 60 seconds. 90 seconds. The patrol boat seemed to be lingering, its spotlight probing the shadows beneath the pier with unusual thoroughness. 2 minutes. Delacroix's lungs began to register the oxygen debt, not critical yet, but present, a reminder that time underwater was a finite resource. She glanced at Ewan, saw his calm expression through the murk, and felt a measure of reassurance. 2 minutes and 30 seconds. The light finally swept past them and continued down the length of the pier. The patrol boat's engine note changed as it accelerated away, resuming its normal circuit of the harbor. They surfaced slowly, exhaling in controlled bursts that broke the surface without sound. Delacroix drew fresh air into her lungs and waited for her heart rate to settle. That was not on the patrol schedule, Ewan whispered. No, it was not. They continued their approach with heightened caution, moving from pylon to pylon in short bursts that minimized their exposure. The pier stretched ahead of them, 200 meters of concrete and shadow that would either deliver them to their objective or become their tomb. At the overwatch position, Delacroix helped Ewan establish his platform on a wide crossbeam that provided both stability and concealment. He unwrapped his rifle with practiced efficiency, checking the scope, confirming the zero, settling into the patient stillness that defined his craft. Delacroix positioned herself at the waterline beneath him, ready to provide security or assistance as needed. From here, she could see the administrative building through gaps in the pier structure. Lights burned in the second-floor windows. Vehicles clustered in the parking area. Guards patrolled the perimeter in patterns that matched their intelligence. So far, so good. She keyed her radio, breaking the silence for the first time since insertion. Overwatch established. Sightlines confirmed. Ready for assault element approach. Stokes responded immediately. Copy, recon. Assault element moving to breach position. Maintain observation. The minutes stretched like hours. Delacroix watched the guards, counted their patrol intervals, noted the positions of vehicles and personnel. Everything matched the intelligence briefing. Everything suggested a routine night at a facility that did not know it was about to be visited by American Special Operations Forces. Then Yuen's hand touched her shoulder. She looked up to see him gesturing toward the administrative building. Something was wrong. Through his scope, Yuen had spotted movement in the second floor that did not match the expected pattern. More people than anticipated. More activity than the intelligence had suggested. He handed the scope to Delacroix, and she pressed her eye to the lens. The target was there. Kareem Vasquez, weapons facilitator, the man responsible for funneling arms to terrorist networks across 3 continents. But he was not alone in a quiet negotiation as they had expected. The room was crowded with armed men, at least a dozen visible through the windows, and more arriving even as she watched. The weapons transfer was not scheduled for the following night. It was happening now. Delacroix keyed her radio. Stokes, we have a problem. Target has accelerated timeline. Transfer is in progress. Repeat, transfer is in progress. The response came after a long pause. Assault element is not in position. We need 15 more minutes to reach breach point. 15 minutes. Delacroix watched another vehicle pull into the compound, watched more armed men emerge and enter the building. In 15 minutes, the transfer could be complete. Vasquez could be gone. The weapons could be on their way to destinations that would see them used against innocent people. Recon element. Maintain observation only. Do not engage. Stokes's voice carried the weight of command decision. We cannot compromise the assault for a changed timeline. Delacroix lowered the scope and met Yuen's eyes. They both understood what the order meant. They were going to watch the target escape because protocol demanded patience over action. But as she returned her gaze to the administrative building, a new complication emerged that made the timeline irrelevant. Footsteps on the pier above them. Multiple sets, moving with purpose toward their position. And then, a voice speaking in the local dialect, followed by the unmistakable sound of a weapon being readied. The guards were coming, and Delacroix and Yuen had nowhere to go but down. Delacroix grabbed Yuen's arm and pulled him off the crossbeam into the water. They submerged together, descending into the black depths beneath the pier as flashlight beams stabbed through the gaps in the planking above them. The voices grew louder. 2 guards, maybe 3, their footsteps echoing off the concrete as they walked the length of the pier. One of them laughed at something the other said. Casual. Routine. Not a search party then. Just a patrol passing through. But passing through directly over their position. Delacroix settled against a pylon at 12 feet depth, her body motionless, her eyes fixed on the dancing lights above. Yuen floated beside her, his rifle still secured to his chest, his expression calm behind his mask. They had trained for this. They had prepared for this. But training and preparation meant nothing if the guards decided to look down at the wrong moment. 60 seconds passed. The footsteps continued overhead, slow and deliberate. The flashlight beams probed the shadows between the pylons, occasionally dipping toward the water surface. 90 seconds. Delacroix's lungs began their familiar protest, the carbon dioxide building in her bloodstream, her diaphragm starting to flutter with the urge to breathe. She pushed the sensation aside with practiced discipline. This was nothing. This was a warm-up. 2 minutes. The guards had stopped walking. Their voices carried through the water as distorted rumbles, impossible to decipher but clearly engaged in extended conversation. One of them was directly above the crossbeam where Yuen had been positioned moments earlier. Delacroix watched as a flashlight beam swept down and illuminated the wooden platform. If they had been 30 seconds slower to submerge, they would have been caught in that light like insects pinned to a display board. 2 minutes and 30 seconds. The conversation above continued. Someone was arguing about something, their voice rising and falling with the cadence of complaint. The other guards responded with what sounded like dismissal. 3 minutes. The familiar darkness began to creep in at the edges of Delacroix's vision. Her body was burning through its oxygen reserves, her muscles screaming for fuel that was not coming. She focused on slowing her heart rate, on reducing her metabolic demand to the absolute minimum. Beside her, Yuan tapped her arm. He pointed upward, then made the hand signal for movement. The guard were finally walking again, but they were walking slowly, and they were still talking. 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Delacroix felt the first involuntary spasm in her diaphragm, her body's desperate attempt to force a breath that would mean death. She clamped down on the reflex with every ounce of willpower she possessed. The lights above began to recede. The footsteps grew fainter. The voices faded into the ambient noise of the port. 3 minutes and 45 seconds. Delacroix signaled Yuan, and they began a slow ascent, rising toward the surface with agonizing patience. Breaking the water too fast could create noise, could attract attention, could undo everything they had endured. They surfaced in the shadow of a pylon, exhaling in controlled silence, drawing fresh air into lungs that burned with oxygen debt. Delacroix allowed herself 3 deep breaths before her training reasserted itself. No time for recovery. No time for weakness. The guard were gone, but the situation had changed. The element of surprise was compromised. Their position was no longer secure, and the target was still preparing to escape. Delacroix keyed her radio, keeping her voice barely above a whisper. "Stokes, we had a close call. Guards passed directly over our position. We are still undetected, but our overwatch may be compromised." The response came immediately. "Understood, recon. Assault element is still 12 minutes out. Can you maintain position?" Delacroix looked at Yuan. He nodded once. "We can maintain, but be advised, target activity is increasing. Transfer may be complete before assault element arrives." A long pause. Then Stokes's voice returned, carrying the weight of impossible choices. "Maintain observation only. Do not engage unless directly threatened." "Acknowledge." "Acknowledged." Yuan climbed back onto the crossbeam and settled behind his rifle. Delacroix resumed her position at the waterline, her eyes scanning the pier structure for any sign of returning patrols. The administrative building glowed in the distance, its windows revealing the shadows of men conducting business that would kill innocent people on 3 continents. Minutes passed like hours. Delacroix watched vehicles come and go, watched guards rotate through their positions, watched the target move from room to room as the negotiation progressed. Her mind calculated angles and distances, planned approaches and contingencies, prepared for action that she had been ordered not to take. Then Yuan's hand touched her shoulder again. His expression had changed. Something was wrong. He handed her the scope without speaking. She raised it to her eye and found the window he had been watching. Vasquez was shaking hands with another man. The body language was unmistakable. The deal was done. The weapons transfer was complete. In moments, the target would walk out of that building and disappear into a network of safe houses and smuggling routes that would render him untouchable. "Stokes," Delacroix transmitted. "Target is concluding negotiations. He is about to leave. Request permission to interdict." "Negative, recon. Assault element is still 8 minutes out. You do not have the firepower for a direct engagement. Maintain position and track his departure. We will pursue through other channels." Other channels. Delacroix knew what that meant. Diplomatic pressure that would go nowhere. Intelligence sharing that would arrive too late. Months of planning and preparation ending in a footnote on an after-action report. She lowered the scope and met Yuan's eyes. The sniper's expression was unreadable, but she knew what he was thinking. They had a clear shot. One bullet could end a career of mass murder. One decision could save hundreds of lives. But that decision would end their careers. would validate every accusation Rennick had ever made, would prove that she could not follow orders, could not be trusted, could not function as part of a team. 2 seconds. That was all it had taken in Mindanao to destroy everything she had built. And now she faced another moment where hesitation would define her future. Vasquez emerged from the building, surrounded by bodyguards, walking toward a waiting vehicle. Delacroix watched him through the scope. Her finger rested on her radio. One word to Ewan and the target would drop. One word and the mission would be complete. One word and her career would be over. The vehicle's door opened. Vasquez began to climb inside. And then everything changed. A shout from somewhere in the compound. Guards running toward the waterfront. Flashlights sweeping across the pier, across the water, across the pylons where Delacroix and Ewan had taken shelter. Someone had found something. A scuff mark on the crossbeam. A ripple in the water that should not have been there. Evidence that the port was not as secure as they believed. The alarm began to wail. Stokes's voice exploded through the radio. "Recon element, what is your status?" "Recon element, respond." Delacroix watched the guards converging on the pier. She watched Vasquez pause at his vehicle door, looking toward the commotion. She watched the window of opportunity shrinking with every passing second. Compromised, she transmitted. "We are compromised. Guards are approaching our position, requesting guidance." The pause that followed lasted an eternity. Then Stokes spoke the words that would change everything. "Recon element, you are authorized to engage. Take the shot. Take the target down." Delacroix looked at Ewan. The sniper was already settling behind his rifle, his eye pressed to the scope, his finger moving to the trigger. She had 1 second to decide. Give the order and complete the mission. Hesitate and lose everything. This time, she did not hesitate. "Do it," she said. The rifle spoke once, a suppressed cough that was swallowed by the chaos of the alarm. And Kareem Vasquez crumpled to the ground. The compound erupted into chaos. Guards sprinted toward the fallen body of Vasquez, their shouts overlapping in a cacophony of confusion and rage. Floodlights blazed to life across the pier, transforming the shadows that had concealed Delacroix and Ewan into bright, killing fields. "Move," Delacroix hissed. Ewan was already sliding off the crossbeam, his rifle secured against his chest as he dropped into the water beside her. They submerged together, pulling themselves along the underside of the pier toward the next pylon, away from the converging guards. Above them, boots pounded against concrete. Flashlight beams stabbed into the water, probing the depths for any sign of the shooters. Delacroix pressed herself against the pylon, her body flush with the barnacline-crusted concrete, her lungs holding steady as the light swept past her position. Stokes's voice crackled through the radio. "Recon element, confirm target status." Delacroix could not respond without surfacing, without risking exposure. She stayed down, counting seconds, tracking the movement of the lights above. 45 seconds. A guard stopped directly overhead, his flashlight beam dancing across the water surface. He was looking for something. Looking for them. Delacroix felt Ewan's hand on her arm. A question. She responded with a squeeze. "Hold position. Wait." 60 seconds. The guard called out to his companions, his voice muffled by the water. Other footsteps approached. More lights. More eyes searching the darkness. 90 seconds. Delacroix's lungs began to register the strain. Not critical yet, but building. The familiar pressure that preceded real discomfort. The guards above were not leaving. They were setting up a search pattern, methodically working their way along the pier. Delacroix could see at least 4 separate flashlight beams now, all focused on the water beneath the structure. 2 minutes. She needed a surface. They both needed a surface. But the guards were everywhere, their lights creating an interlocking web of illumination that left no shadows deep enough to hide in. Ewan pointed toward the shore. A drainage pipe jutted from the concrete seawall, its opening just barely visible in the murk. Large enough for a person to enter. Possibly large enough to provide temporary refuge. Delacroix nodded. They began moving through the water, pulling themselves along the bottom, staying below the reach of the flashlights. The distance was perhaps 30 meters. An eternity when every second without air brought them closer to the edge. 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Her vision was starting to narrow, the familiar darkness creeping in from the periphery. She pushed it aside and kept moving. 20 meters to the pipe. 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Ewan was slowing beside her, his movements becoming less precise. He was reaching his limit too. 10 meters. 3 minutes. Delacroix grabbed the edge of the drainage pipe and pulled herself inside, turning immediately to help Ewan follow. The pipe angled upward, and she prayed that men it would surface somewhere beyond the reach of the guards. They crawled through absolute darkness, the walls of the pipe pressing close around them, the water rising with each foot of progress. Delacroix's shoulders scraped against concrete. Her equipment caught on protrusions she could not see. But she kept moving, kept pulling herself forward, kept refusing to surrender to the burning in her chest. 3 minutes and 20 seconds. The water level dropped. Air pocket. Small, perhaps 2 feet of clearance, but enough. Delacroix broke the surface and gasped, the sound echoing off the walls of the pipe like a gunshot. She clamped her mouth shut immediately, forcing herself back into controlled breathing. Ewan surfaced beside her, his own breath ragged but quiet. They floated in the darkness, their bodies pressed against the curved walls of the drainage pipe, their faces barely above the waterline. Above them, muffled by concrete and earth, they could hear the ongoing search. Shouts, running footsteps, the wail of the alarm. Status, Delacroix whispered into her radio. Stokes responded immediately. Recon element, we have been trying to reach you. Assault element has breached the compound. Guards are engaged on the northern perimeter. What is your position? Delacroix looked around the pitch-black interior of the drainage pipe, somewhere she had never expected to be. We are in a drainage system on the southern seawall, taking cover from search parties. Can you exfiltrate to the extraction point? Negative. Too much activity on the pier. We need the guards drawn away before we can move. A pause. Then Stokes' voice returned. Assault element is pressing the engagement. Guards should be pulled toward the northern perimeter within the next few minutes. Hold your position and await further instructions. Copy. Delacroix let her head fall back against the concrete, allowing herself a moment of stillness in the cramped darkness. Beside her, Ewan's breathing had stabilized. The sniper's presence was reassuring, a reminder that she was not alone in this pipe, in this mission, in this fight. Good shot, she said quietly. Good call, he replied. They waited in silence after that, listening to the muffled sounds of combat filtering through the concrete above them. The assault element was engaged. Men were fighting and dying while Delacroix and Ewan floated in a drainage pipe, waiting for their moment to move. 10 minutes passed. The sounds above shifted, the concentration of gunfire moving away from their position toward the northern end of the compound. The search parties on the pier were being recalled, their flashlight beams disappearing one by one. Recon element. Stokes' voice cut through the darkness. Assault element has secured the administrative building and is moving to extraction. Most guards have been neutralized or have fled. Your path to the water should be clear. Acknowledged. Delacroix began moving back down the pipe, Ewan following close behind. The return journey was faster, their bodies already adapted to the confined space, their urgency overriding discomfort. They emerged from the pipe into the harbor, the water dark and welcoming after the claustrophobic confines of the drainage system. The pier loomed above them, now silent and mostly dark. Bodies lay at intervals along its length, guards who had been in the wrong place when the assault element arrived. Delacroix oriented herself toward the extraction point, 800 meters of open water between them and safety. They began to swim. 300 meters out, Ewan touched her arm and pointed back toward the shore. Muzzle flashes on the far dock. A sustained firefight that should not still be happening if the assault element had secured the objective. Delacroix raised her head above the water and keyed her radio. Stokes, we are observing continued engagement on the eastern dock. What is the situation? The response came not from Stokes, but from a voice she recognized. Rennick, his words clipped and strained. We are pinned down. For shooters in elevated positions. Our extract boat took an RPG and is disabled. We have 2 wounded and no way out. Delacroix treaded water, staring at the distant muzzle flashes. The extraction point was 400 meters ahead. Safety. Mission complete. Her part was done. But Rennick was trapped. Rennick and his team. The men who had doubted her. The man who had tried to destroy her career. She looked at Ewan. The sniper's expression was unreadable in the darkness, but his eyes held a question. Delacroix did not hesitate. We are coming, she transmitted. Hold your position. We are coming. They swam toward the gunfire. Every instinct screamed against it. Every calculation of odds and outcomes pointed toward the extraction point behind them, toward the waiting boat that would carry them to safety. But Delacroix had made her choice, and the choice had been easy. You did not leave people behind, not even people who wanted you gone. The eastern dock materialized from the darkness, a concrete structure smaller than the main pier, but similarly constructed. Muzzle flashes strobed from elevated positions along the adjacent warehouse, shooters pouring fire down onto the pinned assault element. Delacroix could see the operators huddled behind a cargo container, their return fire sporadic and ineffective against the elevated threat. Ewan touched her arm and pointed. A service ladder ran up the side of the dock, leading to a maintenance platform that would give them access to the warehouse roof. If they could reach it undetected, Ewan could engage the shooters from an unexpected angle. Delacroix nodded and began swimming toward the ladder. The water near the dock was cluttered with debris. Floating crates, oil slicks, the detritus of a working port that had suddenly become a battlefield. She navigated through it carefully, keeping her profile low, her movements invisible against the chaos of the firefight. 30 meters to the ladder. A body floated past her, face down, the uniform marking him as one of the port guards. Delacroix pushed it aside without slowing. 20 meters. The shooters above had not noticed their approach. Their attention was fixed on the pinned operators, on the killing ground they had created at the base of the cargo container. Rennick's voice crackled through the radio, calling for support that was not coming, requesting extraction from a boat that no longer existed. 10 meters. Delacroix reached the ladder and gripped the lowest rung, pulling herself up until her head cleared the waterline. The dock surface was empty, the guards either dead or focused on the firefight. She climbed quickly, water streaming from her wet suit, her hand reaching down to help Ewan up behind her. They moved in tactical silence across the dock toward the warehouse. The maintenance platform was 20 meters ahead, a metal staircase leading up to a catwalk that ran along the edge of the roof. From there, Ewan would have clear angles on the shooters. Delacroix took point, her sidearm drawn, her eyes scanning for threats. Ewan followed with his rifle ready. The sniper's patience transformed into deadly focus. They reached the staircase without contact. Delacroix held at the base while Ewan ascended, his footsteps silent on the metal treads. She watched him disappear onto the catwalk, counted to 10, and followed. The rooftop spread out before them, a flat expanse of concrete and ventilation equipment. For shooters were positioned along the far edge, their weapons trained on the dock below. They had no idea death had arrived behind them. Ewan settled into position, his rifle steady, his breathing slow. Delacroix crouched beside him, her sidearm ready to engage any target he missed. The sniper's voice was barely audible. Far left first, then right. I will take the center too. Delacroix nodded. On your shot. Ewan exhaled slowly. His finger moved. The rifle coughed twice in rapid succession. 2 of the center shooters dropped before they understood they were under attack. Delacroix engaged the far left target, her pistol barking once, twice. The man spun and fell. The fourth shooter turned toward them, weapon rising. Ewan's rifle spoke again, and the man crumpled, his gun clattering across the concrete. Silence descended over the dock. The gunfire that had pinned Rennick's element ended as abruptly as it had begun. Delacroix keyed her radio. Assault element, threats neutralized. You're clear to move. A pause. Then Rennick's voice, strained but controlled. Copy. We have 2 wounded, 1 critical. Need immediate extract. We are on the warehouse roof. Coming down to assist. They descended from the catwalk and crossed the dock to the cargo container. The assault element was battered but intact. 2 operators sat against the container, their wounds being treated by a teammate. One of them was Webb, his leg wrapped in a hasty bandage, his face pale but alert. And there was Rennick. The senior chief lay on his back, another operator pressing a compress against his side. Blood seeped between the man's fingers. The wound was serious. Delacroix knelt beside him. She could see the pain in his eyes, the frustration of a warrior laid low by a bullet he had not seen coming. How bad? She asked the operator applying pressure. Through and through. Missed the kidney, but he is losing blood fast. We need to move him now. Rennick grabbed Delacroix's arm, his grip weak but insistent. His eyes locked onto hers. You came back. She held his gaze. Of course I did. Something flickered in his expression. Pain, certainly, but something else too. Something that looked almost like recognition. There was no time for words. Delacroix stood and began organizing the evacuation. The extraction point was 800 meters across open water, and they had 1 critically wounded operator who could not swim. Ewan, take point. I will bring Rennick. She pulled the senior chief to his feet, draping his arm over her shoulder, taking his weight against her side. He groaned, but did not protest. The water was cold when they entered it, cold and dark and endless. Delacroix held Rennick against her, keeping his head above the surface, kicking with steady power toward the distant lights of the extraction boat that had finally arrived. Rennick drifted in and out of consciousness, his body going slack against hers, then tensing with pain as awareness returned. She talked to him as they swam, a steady stream of words designed to keep him present, keep him fighting. Stay with me, Senior Chief. We're almost there. Stay with me. His voice was barely a whisper. Why? Why did you come back for us? Delacroix kicked harder, pulling them through the water. Because that is what teammates do. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, so softly she almost missed it. I was wrong about you. She did not respond. There would be time for words later if they survived. Now, there was only the water and the weight of the man against her, and the distant lights growing slowly brighter. 400 meters to the boat. Rennick's head dropped against her shoulder. His breathing was shallow, his body cold. Stay with me, Delacroix repeated. You do not get to die owing me an apology. A sound escaped him that might have been a laugh, might have been a sob, might have been both. 200 meters. The extraction boat's spotlight found them, a brilliant beam cutting through the darkness. Operators reached over the side, hands grabbing Rennick, pulling him up and out of the water. Delacroix followed, collapsing onto the deck, her muscles screaming with exhaustion. Above her, medics worked frantically on Rennick's wound. Ewan knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder. You good? He asked. Delacroix stared at the stars wheeling overhead, felt the boat accelerating towards safety, and allowed herself to breathe. Yes, she said. I am good. The helicopter's rotors beat a steady rhythm against the night sky as the medical evacuation team worked on Rennick. Delacroix sat against the bulkhead, her wet suit still dripping, her body running on reserves she did not know she possessed. Across from her, Webb had his wounded leg elevated, his eyes fixed on the unconscious senior chief. You gonna make it? Webb asked. The medic did not look up from his work. Tough call. Lost a lot of blood. But he is fighting. Delacroix watched the monitors, the steady beep of Rennick's heartbeat, a fragile thread connecting him to the living. She had carried that heartbeat across 800 meters of open water. She had felt it slowing against her chest as his body surrendered to shock and blood loss. She had refused to let it stop. The helicopter banked toward the hospital ship waiting offshore. Delacroix closed her eyes and let the vibration of the aircraft settle into her bones. She must have slept, because the next thing she knew, Ewan was shaking her shoulder and the helicopter was descending toward a flight deck blazing with lights. Medical personnel swarmed the aircraft before it fully touched down, rushing Rennick toward the ship's surgical bay on a stretcher that seemed too small for a man who had loomed so large in her life. Webb went next, his protests about walking ignored by corpsmen who had seen too many tough operators collapse from untreated injuries. Then it was just Delacroix and Ewan, standing on the flight deck as the chaos subsided around them. Commander Stokes met them at the hangar entrance, her face drawn with exhaustion and something else. Relief, perhaps, or the weight of decisions that had nearly gotten people killed. Chief Delacroix, Petty Officer Ewan. She looked them over with the practiced eye of a commanding officer assessing damage. Are you injured? Nothing that will not heal, Commander. Stokes nodded. Debriefing in 2 hours. Get cleaned up, get something to eat, get your head straight. We have a lot to discuss. The officers' quarters on the hospital ship were cramped but functional. Delacroix stood under the shower for a long time, letting the hot water wash away the salt and oil and blood that had accumulated on her skin. She watched it swirl down the drain and tried not to think about how close everything had come to falling apart. The debriefing was held in a small conference room that smelled of coffee and tension. Stokes sat at the head of the table, flanked by intelligence officers and a Navy Captain Delacroix did not recognize. Ewan sat beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. They walked through the operation from beginning to end. The insertion, the changed timeline, the decision to take the shot, the chaos that followed, the rescue of the pinned assault element. When Delacroix finished describing the swim back to the extraction point with Rennick in tow, the room was silent. The Navy captain spoke first. Chief Delacroix, you disobeyed a direct order to maintain observation only. You engaged the target without authorization from the assault element. Delacroix met his eyes. With respect, Captain, I received authorization from Commander Stokes when our position was compromised. Authorization that came after you had already positioned for the shot. She did not flinch. The target was about to escape. The mission was about to fail. I made a judgment call in a fluid tactical situation. The captain leaned back in his chair. And then you abandoned your extraction route to rescue an element that was not your responsibility. They were pinned down with wounded. Their extraction was destroyed. I had the capability to assist. You could have been killed. You could have gotten Petty Officer Ewan killed. Delacroix felt Ewan shift beside her, but she did not look at him. I could have, but I did not. And Senior Chief Rennick is alive because we made the choice we made. The captain studied her for a long moment. Then he turned to Stokes. Commander, your assessment. Stokes folded her hands on the table. Chief Delacroix demonstrated exceptional judgment under pressure, initiative in the face of changing circumstances, and the kind of selfless courage that defines special operations. She saved the mission and she saved lives. If that is not what we're training our people to do, then I do not know what we are doing here. The intelligence officer cleared his throat. For what it is worth, Vasquez's network is already collapsing. The weapons transfer was interrupted. 3 of his key lieutenants were captured in the assault. This operation will save hundreds of lives over the coming years. The captain nodded slowly. He looked at Delacroix one more time, something shifting in his expression. Very well. This debriefing is concluded. Chief Delacroix, you and Petty Officer Ewan are released to rest and recovery. He paused. Well done. The words hung in the air as Delacroix rose from her chair. She had heard those words before, from instructors and commanders throughout her career. But somehow, after everything that had happened, they carried a different weight. She was halfway to the door when Stokes called her name. Chief, a word. Delacroix waited while the others filed out. When they were alone, Stokes stood and crossed to where she waited. I owe you an apology, the commander said quietly. I should have done more to address Rennick's behavior. I knew what he was doing, and I let it continue because it was easier than fighting him. Delacroix considered her response carefully. You gave me a chance when it mattered, Commander. That is what I will remember. Stokes shook her head. That is generous of you. More generous than I deserve. She extended her hand. For what it is worth, I am glad you are on this team. Delacroix took the offered hand. So am I, Commander. She found Ewan waiting for her in the passageway outside. The sniper fell in a step beside her as she walked toward the quarters they had been assigned. That could have gone worse, he said. It could have. They walked in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Ewan spoke again. Have you heard anything about Rennick? Delacroix shook her head. Still in surgery when I last checked. They reached the quarters and stopped outside the door. Ewan turned to face her. What he did out there? Swimming back for them, carrying him across 800 meters of open water. He paused, searching for words. I have been in this community for 8 years. Worked with operators from every branch. And I have never seen anything like that. Delacroix leaned against the bulkhead, suddenly aware of how tired she was. I did not think about it, she said. I just did it. Ewan nodded. That is what makes it remarkable. He put his hand on her shoulder, a brief gesture of solidarity. Get some rest. I have a feeling tomorrow is going to be complicated. She watched him walk away, then entered her quarters and collapsed onto the bunk without bothering to remove her boots. Sleep claimed her before her head hit the pillow. When she woke, 12 hours had passed, and there was a message waiting on her phone. Rennick was out of surgery. He was stable, and he was asking to see her. The hospital bay smelled of antiseptic and recycled air. Delacroix paused outside the door to Rennick's room, her hand hovering over the handle. She had faced armed enemies, survived underwater ordeals that would have killed most people, carried a man twice her size across open water under fire. But this door felt heavier than all of it. She pushed it open and stepped inside. Rennick lay in the hospital bed, tubes and monitors surrounding him like a technological cocoon. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion and pain. But those ice-blue eyes were open, and they tracked her as she approached. Chief Delacroix. His voice was rough, weakened by surgery and blood loss. Thank you for coming. She stopped at the foot of his bed, maintaining the professional distance that had defined their relationship since her first day at the command. Senior Chief. How are you feeling? Like I got shot. He attempted a smile that did not quite succeed. Doctors say I will make a full recovery. Thanks to you. Delacroix said nothing. She had not come here for gratitude. She was not sure why she had come. Rennick shifted in the bed, wincing at the movement. Sit down, please. She considered refusing, considered walking out and letting whatever he wanted to say remain unsaid. But something in his expression stopped her. Something that looked almost like vulnerability. She sat in the chair beside his bed and waited. Rennick stared at the ceiling for a long moment, gathering words that seemed to cost him more than the bullet wound in his side. I have been doing this for 22 years, he said finally. Started as an 18-year-old kid who did not know anything about anything. Worked my way up. Earned every qualification, every billet, every promotion. He paused. I believed in the system. Believed that if you worked hard enough, proved yourself enough, you would be recognized. Delacroix remained silent. When they started talking about integration, about putting women in combat roles, I fought it. Not because I thought women were weak. I knew better than that. My mother raised 4 boys by herself after my father left. Strongest person I ever knew. He turned his head to look at her. I fought it because I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid of change. Afraid of losing something I had given my whole life to. Afraid that everything I had sacrificed would suddenly mean less because the rules were different. He shook his head slowly. Stupid, selfish fears. But real. Delacroix felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. My brother was a SEAL, Rennick continued. Marcus, 2 years younger than me. Best operator I ever knew. He was killed 4 years ago on an operation in Syria. I did not know that. Nobody does. I did not talk about it. Rennick's jaw tightened. The official report said it was an equipment failure. Faulty breaching charge. But I knew the team leader. She was one of the first women to complete the pipeline. And I convinced myself that she had made a mistake. That Marcus died because someone had been given a position they had not earned. His eyes found hers, and she saw the pain there. Old pain buried deep. I was wrong. I looked at the after-action reports, the investigation findings. She did everything right. The equipment failed. Nobody's fault. But I needed someone to blame. Someone to hate. Because hating was easier than grieving. Delacroix understood that kind of pain. The kind that twisted itself into anger, because anger was easier to carry than sorrow. When you showed up at the command, Rennick said, I saw her. Every time I looked at you, I saw the woman I had blamed for my brother's death. And I decided that I would not let it happen again. That I would push you until you broke, until you proved that you did not belong, until I could say that I was right all along. The monitors beeped in the silence that followed. Delacroix watched Rennick's face, watched the effort it took him to lay himself bare like this. But you did not break, he continued. Every obstacle I put in your way, you overcame. Every impossible standard I set, you exceeded. And when everything went wrong on that dock, when my team was pinned down and I was bleeding out, you came back. He swallowed hard. You came back for the man who had tried to destroy you. You would have done the same. Maybe. He was quiet for a moment. But I would not have done it for you. Not before. And that is something I will have to live with. Delacroix leaned forward in her chair. Senior Chief, what happened in Syria was not your fault. And what happened to your brother was not that team leader's fault. Sometimes people die, and there's nobody to blame. Sometimes the universe just takes, and there's nothing we can do but keep going. Rennick's eyes glistened. She realized she had never seen him show emotion before. Had never imagined he could. How do you do it? He asked. How do you keep going after Mindanao? After what happened to Patterson? The question hit her like a physical blow. She had not spoken about Patterson to anyone except the mandatory counseling sessions. Had not expected Rennick to know the details. You read my file, she said. I read everything, looking for ammunition. Instead, I found someone who understood exactly what it felt like to blame yourself for something you could not control. Delacroix was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than she intended. I keep going because stopping is not an option. Because the only way to honor the people we have lost is to become better, to do the work, to save the next person when we could not save the last one. She met his eyes. You saved a lot of people in 22 years, Senior Chief. Your brother will be proud of that. Rennick closed his eyes. A single tear tracked down his weathered cheek. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of shared grief and hard-won understanding settling between them. Finally, Rennick spoke again. I cannot undo what I did. The evaluations, the impossible assignments, the attempt to build a case against you. He opened his eyes. But I can tell the truth. I can make sure everyone knows that you are one of the best operators I have ever served with. And I can spend whatever time I have left trying to be worthy of what you did for me. Delacroix stood. She looked down at the man who had been her enemy, her obstacle, her shadow for 18 months. And she made a choice. She extended her hand. I look forward to serving with you, Senior Chief. Rennick took her hand. His grip was weak, but his eyes were clear. Likewise, Chief Delacroix. Likewise. The C-17 touched down at Naval Air Station North Island 3 days later, its cargo hold carrying a team transformed by what they had endured together. Delacroix sat in the same seat she had occupied on the flight out, but everything else had changed. Rennick had been transferred to Balboa Naval Medical Center for continued recovery. Webb sat across from her now, his wounded leg propped on an equipment case, his expression thoughtful as he watched the California coastline pass beneath them. Ewan dozed beside her, the sniper's ability to sleep anywhere a skill she had always envied. The other operators had been different since the extraction. Small changes, almost imperceptible. A nod of acknowledgement in the passageway. A seat saved at the mess table. The absence of whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. She did not expect friendship from all of them, but respect was enough. Respect was everything. Commander Stokes met them on the tarmac, her dress uniform crisp despite the early hour. She walked the line of returning operators, offering brief words to each, her eyes lingering on the wounded. When she reached Delacroix, she paused. Chief, my office at 1400. There are matters to discuss. Delacroix nodded. Aye, Commander. The team dispersed to barracks and medical facilities and the waiting arms of families who had spent sleepless nights wondering if their loved ones would return. Delacroix had no one waiting for her. Her parents were gone, her siblings scattered across the country, her relationships sacrificed on the altar of a career that demanded everything. She returned to her quarters and stood under the shower until the water ran cold. Then she dressed in fresh utilities and made her way to Commander Stokes's office. The commander was not alone. A rear admiral sat in one of the chairs facing her desk, his chest heavy with ribbons, his expression unreadable. Delacroix snapped to attention. Chief Petty Officer Delacroix reporting as ordered. At ease, Chief. Stokes gestured to the empty chair. Please sit. Delacroix sat, keeping her spine straight, her hands folded in her lap. She had learned long ago that unexpected meetings with flag officers rarely brought good news. The admiral spoke first. Chief Delacroix, I am Rear Admiral Thornton. I oversee special operations personnel assignments for the Pacific Fleet. He studied her with eyes that had evaluated thousands of careers. I have read the after-action reports from Port Common. All of them. Yes, sir. I have also read your service record, your training evaluations, your performance metrics. He paused. And I have read Senior Chief Rennick's revised assessment of your capabilities. Delacroix kept her expression neutral despite the surprise that flickered through her. Rennick had already submitted a revised assessment. From a hospital bed, before she had even returned to Coronado. The Admiral continued. Senior Chief Rennick describes you as one of the most capable operators he has encountered in over 2 decades of service. He specifically cites your tactical judgment, your physical endurance, your leadership under fire, and your, quote, extraordinary commitment to the welfare of teammates regardless of personal cost. The words settled into Delacroix's chest like stones dropped into still water. Rennick had kept his promise. More than kept it. Commander Stokes took over. Based on these assessments and your demonstrated performance, we are recommending you for promotion to Senior Chief Petty Officer. The board will convene next month, but Admiral Thornton wanted to inform you personally that you have his full support. Delacroix felt the world tilt slightly. Senior Chief, the rank that Rennick held, the rank that would put her in a position to lead teams, shape careers, influence the future of special operations. Additionally, Admiral Thornton said, we are establishing a new training cadre focused on maritime special reconnaissance. Commander Stokes has recommended you as the lead instructor. You would be responsible for developing curriculum, selecting candidates, and building a program that will define how we conduct these operations for the next generation. Delacroix found her voice. Sir, I am honored, truly, but I am not certain I am ready for that level of responsibility. The Admiral smiled slightly. Chief, you carried a wounded senior chief across 800 meters of open water while under fire, after spending 4 minutes submerged beneath a hostile dock, after making a tactical decision that eliminated a high-value target and saved an entire operation. He shook his head. If you're not ready, then nobody is. Stokes leaned forward. You have a choice, of course. You can decline the instructor position and remain in an operational role. Nobody would fault you for that. But I believe you have something to offer beyond your own capabilities. I believe you can teach others to be what you are. Delacroix was quiet for a long moment. She thought about the path that had brought her here, the bayous of Louisiana where she had learned to hold her breath, the training pipeline that had nearly broken her, the 18 months of fighting for every inch of ground against opponents who wore the same uniform. And she thought about the recruits who would come after her, the young women who would face the same obstacles, the same doubts, the same enemies in friendly clothing. They would need someone who understood, someone who had walked the path and survived. I accept, she said, both the promotion recommendation and the instructor position. Admiral Thornton rose and extended his hand. Congratulations, Chief. The Navy is fortunate to have you. After the Admiral departed, Commander Stokes walked Delacroix to the door. She paused with her hand on the frame. There's one more thing. Stokes's expression softened. Webb submitted a request this morning. He wants to be assigned to your training cadre as an assistant instructor. Delacroix blinked. Webb, the man who had mocked her when she arrived. The man she had saved in the training tank. The man who had watched her carry Rennick through the darkness. He said, and I quote, that he wants to learn how to be the kind of operator who goes back for people. Stokes smiled. I think you made an impression. Delacroix walked out of the headquarters building into the California sunshine. The Pacific stretched blue and endless beyond the base, the same ocean that had nearly killed her and ultimately defined her. She stood there for a moment, letting the warmth soak into her skin, letting herself feel something she had not allowed in 18 months. Pride. Not arrogance, not ego, but the quiet pride of someone who had faced the worst and emerged stronger. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ewan. Heard about the promotion. Drinks tonight. My treat. Also, if you need a sniper instructor for your new program, I know a guy. Delacroix smiled and typed a response. Tell your guy he is hired. 6 weeks later, Delacroix stood at the edge of the combat diving tank, watching a new class of candidates prepare for their first underwater evaluation. The morning sun slanted through the high windows of the training facility, casting long shadows across the water surface. Everything was familiar. Everything was different. The silver anchors of a senior chief petty officer gleamed on her collar. The promotion had come through faster than expected, expedited by Admiral Thornton's personal endorsement and Rennick's detailed recommendation. She had pinned on the rank in a small ceremony attended by Commander Stokes, Ewan, Webb, and a handful of operators who had once questioned her presence among them. Rennick had not attended. He was still recovering at Balboa, his wounds healing slower than his pride would have preferred. But he had sent a message that morning. 3 words that meant more than any ceremony. Earned it. Congratulations. Delacroix had read those words a dozen times before putting her phone away and focusing on the task at hand. The past was settled. The future was waiting. The candidates lined up at the pool's edge, 12 men and women who had volunteered for the most demanding training the Navy could offer. They were young, eager, terrified in ways they tried desperately to hide. Delacroix remembered that feeling, remembered being the one standing at the edge, wondering if she had what it took. She walked the line slowly, meeting each pair of eyes, taking the measure of the people who had entrusted their development to her. "Welcome to Maritime Special Reconnaissance Selection," she said. Her voice carried across the water without effort, the product of years spent commanding attention in hostile environments. Over the next 12 weeks, you will be pushed beyond every limit you thought you had. You will be cold, exhausted, and afraid. You will want to quit. Some of you will quit. She paused, letting the words settle. But those of you who remain will become part of something extraordinary. You will learn to operate in environments that would kill ordinary people. You will learn to think clearly when your body is screaming for you to panic. You will learn that the person beside you is the only thing standing between you and failure. Her eyes found a young woman near the end of the line. Petty Officer Second Class Okonkwo, according to her file. Top of her class in dive school. Recommended by 3 separate commanding officers. And facing the same wall of doubt and resistance that Delacroix had faced 18 months ago. Delacroix held her gaze for a moment longer than the others. A silent message. I see you. I know what you're facing. You are not alone. Your first evolution begins now, Delacroix continued. Enter the water. Swim to the bottom. And hold your breath until I tell you to surface. The candidates entered the pool in a cascade of splashes and bubbles. Delacroix watched them descend, watched their forms settle against the bottom, watched the first seconds of an ordeal that would reveal who they truly were. Ewan appeared at her shoulder, his arms folded, his expression thoughtful. Brings back memories, he said quietly. Good ones or bad ones? Both. He nodded toward the pool. The woman on the end. Okonkwo. She's going to be a problem for some people. Delacroix watched the young petty officer holding steady at the bottom, her body perfectly still, her discipline already evident. Probably, but she's going to be an even bigger problem for our enemies. The seconds ticked past. 1 minute, 90 seconds, 2 minutes. Candidates began to struggle, their bodies fighting the discipline their minds tried to impose. One by one, they broke for the surface, gasping, defeated, humiliated. Okonkwo remained at the bottom. 2 minutes and 30 seconds. The young woman's form was motionless, her eyes fixed on some distant point that only she could see. Delacroix recognized that focus, recognized the iron will that refused to surrender. 3 minutes. The last male candidate broke for the surface, leaving Okonkwo alone at the bottom of the tank. Delacroix waited. She could have called the evolution at any time. could have let the young woman surface with her dignity intact. But she understood something that most instructors did not. Limits were not walls. They were doors, and the only way to open them was to keep pushing. 3 minutes and 15 seconds. Okonkwo's body began to tremble, the telltale signs of oxygen debt setting in. 3 minutes and 30 seconds. Delacroix made her decision. Surface, she called. Okonkwo rose through the water and broke the surface with controlled grace. No gasping, no desperate gulping for air, just the steady, measured breathing of someone who understood that composure was as important as endurance. The other candidates stared at her with a mixture of awe and resentment. Delacroix had seen that look before, had felt it directed at her own back more times than she could count. She crouched at the pool's edge as Okonkwo swam toward her. The young woman looked up, water streaming down her dark face, her eyes holding a question she was afraid to ask. Delacroix extended her hand and pulled Okonkwo onto the deck. She leaned close, speaking words meant only for the two of them. 3 minutes and 30 seconds. Impressive. She held the young woman's gaze. But I have done 4. So you have something to work toward. Okonkwo's eyes widened. Then a smile broke across her face, small but genuine. Yes, Senior Chief. Delacroix straightened and addressed the full class. What you just witnessed is what separates operators from everyone else. Not physical strength, not natural talent. Will, the refusal to quit when every part of you is begging to surrender. She swept her gaze across the dripping, exhausted candidates. Some of you have it. Some of you do not. The next 12 weeks will tell us which is which. The class was dismissed to the locker rooms, leaving Delacroix alone with Ewan and the still water of the training tank. She stood at the edge, looking down at her reflection, remembering a different version of herself who had stood in this same spot wondering if she would survive. Webb appeared in the doorway, his limp almost gone now, a clipboard in his hands. Senior Chief, the afternoon schedule is confirmed. Land navigation at 1300, followed by small unit tactics. Delacroix nodded. Thank you, Petty Officer. She paused. How are the new candidates looking to you? Webb considered the question. Scared, determined, completely unprepared for what is coming. He smiled. Reminds me of someone I used to know. She acknowledged the comment with a slight nod. Get them ready. We have a long road ahead. Webb departed, and Delacroix turned back to the pool. The water was still now, a mirror reflecting the high windows and the California sky beyond. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the bayous of Louisiana, the training pipeline, Rennick's hostility and eventual respect, the dock at Port Common and the 4 minutes that had changed everything. She thought about Patterson, lost in Mindanao, about Rennick's brother Marcus, lost in Syria, about all the ghosts that operators carried with them, the weight that never truly lifted but could be transformed into something that pushed them forward instead of holding them back. And she thought about the young woman named Okonkwo, who would face every obstacle Delacroix had faced and more, who would need someone in her corner when the world tried to convince her she did not belong. Ewan spoke from behind her. Deep thoughts, Senior Chief. Delacroix turned to face her partner, her friend, the man who had never doubted her even when everyone else had. Just thinking about what comes next. Ewan smiled. Same thing as always. We train, we fight, we come home, and we make sure the people who come after us have a better path than we did. Delacroix looked back at the pool one last time. Then she squared her shoulders and walked toward the future she had earned. If this story moved you, drop a comment and share your favorite moment. Tell us about someone in your life who refused to quit when everyone expected them to fail. Or share a time when you surprised yourself with strength you did not know you had. Your stories remind us why we tell these stories.